In the interest of time, I'll start the introduction while everybody's getting seated. You've all heard quite a bit about Dr. Chow. I'll just mention a few things. He received his PhD at the University of California right before they kicked him out, and he flew on 3 shuttle missions and flew on increment 10 of the International Space Station, landing in around 2005. He, since then, has been very busy as an international consultant and speaker. He's been at the NSBRI here in Houston. I've got a chance to work with Leroy in 3 places. One, he was the user group chair for the NSBRI and at SpaceX, where he's, I think, done a great job in trying to help with safety with regard to commercial crew. And also, he's one of the people on the planning committee here, and he's worked very diligently to get the Chinese involved. As you know, there are quite a few constraints to make that difficult to happen, but he's worked very, very hard on getting that done. He also is a pilot, has a Grumman American Tiger. According to Flight Aware, you haven't flown much lately, but no. Seemed like it was 14 weeks ago when you flew from Dallas to here or something. But anyway, I'll introduce Leroy.
All right. Well, thanks, Richard. And I have flown more recently than 14 weeks ago. That was just the last time I filed an IFR flight plan. Okay, well, in the interest of time, we are running a little late, and Dave Dinges has a plane to catch, so we're going to skip to him first and go out of alphabetical order. Let's see, very briefly, Dave, of course, we all know Dave. He's a professor of psychology and in psychiatry. He's the director for the Unit of Experimental Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's also the chief of the Division of Sleep and Chronobiology in the Department of Psychiatry. He's a vice chair in the Department of Psychiatry at the Perelman School of Medicine. Let's see, what else? We all know what kind of research he's involved in: behavioral health and performance for NASA, NIH, DoD, just to name a few. He's currently involved in NASA research. He's done a lot of very historical or long history in research in both laboratories and analogs, as well as on board ISS. So, and of course, one of the big accomplishments, Dave, was the only U.S. investigator involved in the Russian Mars 520 study, and a lot was learned from that, and I'm sure he's going to tell us a little bit about that. So, Dave?
Thanks very much, Leroy. My apologies for changing the order, especially to Mike here. But so I have had the privilege, thanks to NASA, of being part of the Mars 500, the 105-day and 520-day studies that were run in Moscow by Roscosmos at the old IBMP. But I've also had the privilege of working with crews in NEMO, which I think is another outstanding analog and has great strengths in certain ways. 6 different NEMO missions. We've done some analog work in the Houghton Mars crater, the high desert, multiple Hera campaigns. We've been doing work in the Antarctic. NASA couldn't get me an Antarctic station fast enough, so my colleagues Matthias Basner and Alex Stahn from Europe managed to get me their Antarctic station, so we've been studying there. And then, of course, we're privileged to run on ISS, but also high seas, and we have more analog work. I'm a big believer that analogs have something to offer, but it's very important that we specify precisely what the strengths and weaknesses are of each analog. I also think it's important that we try to get people who are somewhat like astronauts, if we can, to be in these studies. Not just any old body will do, in my view. And frankly, all my comments are positive, so I'm not going to go on about it, except to say that the risk we run is violating a fundamental principle of science. If these are not entirely experimental paradigms, they're observational measurement studies where we know the protocol. The risk is that in science, that the measurement you used to measure a scientific phenomena should not alter that scientific phenomenon. And if we load these analogs with too many measures and too many similar measures, not only will the observers notice this and complain bitterly about it, but we are in effect changing the feature of the analog. And so I know there's a desire for efficiency and let everybody have an opportunity, but frankly, we should reduce our measurements down to the key measurements that are essential for an analog to try to get the information that's needed. And so, and obviously that means my measures and nobody else's, but just kidding, kind of. But seriously, we do have to watch out for that. We want to be sure that we don't end up creating a situation that doesn't really tell us as much as we'd like to know about space flight. And in the end, I don't know, I'm going to ask Mike briefly here, is ISS considered an analog?
So,
Yeah, I thought it was.
Are you done?
Yeah, I am.
Well,
okay. Sorry, then wait till your turn, and I'll pass right now.
Yeah, no worries. Well, never mind.
Go ahead, you can answer the question, please.
So, so ISS is an analog, but I would consider it not the ultimate analog. I know there are forces out there that try to make ISS the low Earth orbit wind tunnel for every system and every science bit we would need to know for exploration. I think the ISS's forte is really for systems development, capabilities development, and science output. And anything you do that deviates from those deviates from our central mission. That's why, for instance, we can't just make an austere, time-delayed, isolated habitat and really gain the high-fidelity information in zero gravity that we want. It would cost us in those other areas too much. So that would be my thought. And since Dave and I were talking, we were both on this panel last year, so I'm trying to think of what I didn't say last year. And I think what I'd like to highlight is that there's more to analogs than just the assessments, even the really good ones of behavioral performance. And a lot of that is you shake down products, you shake down behaviors, and you build behaviors. I think since we started flying long duration, starting in the shuttle Mir days, we realized that there were difficulties that arose when there were differences in the expectations between what our short-term shuttle flyers brought to the shuttle Mir experience and then how they realized that experience. Again, this was kind of our understanding catching up with our Russian colleagues. They'd known a lot of this stuff for decades. And fast forward to now, the expectation for pre-flight preparation includes, we'll call it analog training experiences. So I can tell you what I did. I'm a happy veteran of the sea kayaking trip. It's not nearly as comfortable as it sounds. The cold weather training is every bit as uncomfortable as it sounds. Also Nemo and caves. And all of these include elements of spaceflight beyond just isolation and physical discomfort. They include actually doing real science, collecting specimens, processing those, doing imagery. And I think that's a really important aspect of it. The other one is that they include real risk, so that the consequences of your mistakes are very real, and they're progressively dangerous. Caves is one of the most amazing venues run by our ESA counterparts on Sardinia, which is six days and nights underground. Arguably the most dangerous venue we have, where, again, the consequences of a mistake are very real, very immediate, and very dire. But this is the mindset you need, I think, to build these behaviors. And I think it's safe to say that at the current time, we have built an expeditionary culture that we didn't have before that I think prepares us for certainly ISS flights and gets us ready for exploration flights in a way that we really didn't have before. Now, having said that, I was hoping that we would have one of our representatives from our own analog studies at JSC here. We couldn't get them. But we do have an analog at JSC, the Human Exploration Research Analog. And this is not an advertisement because I don't own stock in this company, but I want people to be aware of what we do. As an HRP program manager, I was often reviewing proposals that all included analogs and building infrastructure. And you kind of get tired of trying to build infrastructure every time you want to do a new investigation. So what used to be the deep space habitat became available, and we turned it into the HERA and put it into Building 220 at Johnson Space Center. And we can control things meticulously there. Now, you're not in a really dangerous situation, so it's not that, but it is highly controlled, and it is a place where we can do both behavioral studies and shake down products. We have run, 3 series of campaigns of 1 week, 2 week, 3 week missions. And now I think we're like in number 2 of a 45-day mission. So we've done 30-day missions, 4 of those, and we're on the second 45-day campaign. So what we get out of that is more than just behavioral response to the stresses we give them. And believe me, we make them sweat bullets in there. But we shake down operations products. For instance, the Optimus planning tool that we use on board right now was really put through its paces on Hera and Nemo and other analogs like that. So it's actually quite valuable. The one shortcoming I would say with the Hera analog is that we're not able to use international crews at this point. It's something we're working on. That's a totally legal issue, but that's one of our issues. And I think I will stop there.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And let's see, our next panelist, Luca Parmitano. Welcome to the ISMS. Luca was here last year. His specialty is EVA, and he he participated in a very interesting EVA panel. So Luca is an engineer. He's from Italy. He's an astronaut for the European Space Agency.
Very important. Test pilot, not
Test
an
pilot,
engineer.
yeah, well, I'm getting to that. Lieutenant Colonel, right? Still Lieutenant Colonel, test pilot in the Italian Air Force. And he did fly on long-duration flight aboard ISS. In fact, a little piece of trivia, he's the youngest person to have flown a long-duration mission. He flew on Expedition 3637 and launched aboard Soyuz TMA-9M in 2013. So please, Luca.
Thank you. So my experience with analogs is limited to caves and Nemo, with a little addendum, which is something that we started this year, which is called Cave X, and I will talk a little bit about that in a second. I think that there is something different between an analog like Nemo or Caves and an analog like Mars 500, 520, or the Hera, and it is the operational environment. My belief, and I don't have anything to really compare it because I haven't done the other side, but my belief is that in order to run a good analog and to have a very good understanding of the operational constraint, you need an operational environment, because if you limit the study to a very controlled environment, you take a level of stress that I believe is necessary to really understand what the conditions are going to be. You can put a crew in a building telling them that it's a spacecraft flying to Mars, but the crew knows that they're not flying to Mars and that it's a building and not a spacecraft. When you put the same crew underground for 5 days and 5 nights, 6 days, 6 nights, telling them you are on a lava tube on Mars, we want you to learn how to explore a lava tube, we want you to learn how to take sampling, how to not to avoid contamination, and how to avoid receiving contamination and leaving contamination, then you're putting real constraints on real people in a real environment. Now, you're not on Mars, you're not in a Martian lava tube, but you're in a lava tube and you're in a real environment. It is an analog, but operational. And I think that is a very important distinction between a study, just a pure study, and an analog. The other part that I think is different is the expectations of the participants. As a professional astronaut and an explorer, the idea that I'm doing real exploration when I'm underground or underwater, that I'm using real equipment, adds a level of excitement and interest in what I'm doing. I will always volunteer to participate in a study, but if I believe that what I'm doing actually brings some real concrete results, it's always going to make it more interesting. And that's part of my nature as a test pilot. That's what I did in my previous life, and so I obviously carry it with me. But I saw it in people with different backgrounds too. That's my third point is exactly that. Analogs give us a unique tool to put people that come from non-operational backgrounds and put them into an operational background. Because I think that our space agency do a fantastic job selecting people to become astronauts and to fly to space. despite the fact that they selected me. But other than that, the quality of the people that I've seen being selected at NASA, ESA, JAXA, CSA, our Russian colleagues, is amazing. And they all have different backgrounds. Now, you can select fighter pilots, special operation forces, Navy SEALs. You can put those people into a very stressful environment, and you have a pre-measured expectation. These people have been through those environments, and they come out of it and they know how to react. And then you have people that have the most fantastic academic background, but have not been put through the test of those environments. And I think that these analogs, where there is a component of real risk and consequences, is one of the few chances that we have to let them know their qualities and their capabilities to react to real stressors. Not that they don't have it. They have it, but it's important to have the fuzzy warm feeling that, hey, I've been through that, I've done it, and I came out on top, and I know what to do. So it is very important. And am I taking too much time?
No, we're okay.
Okay. Then for the last point, I swear it's the last point, is the time factor. My experiences on orbit is the longest one I've done, 166 days. I don't know how they survive 520 days in a can, but kudos to them.
Ask me, I will tell you.
Absolutely. But the time factor is important because I was making this example not 20 minutes ago. If you go camping, it takes you, in my experience, it takes you 3 days to adjust to any different environment. So you're probably, the first night you lay there on a cot or on the ground, and you fall asleep, you wake up, you hurt, and then you fall asleep again, you wake up, and you wake up on the next day, and you feel like you haven't slept at all, which is probably true. Second day, a little better. Third day, you're probably going to sleep through the night. Wake up, still all broken because you're not getting younger, but at least you slept. And then from then on, that new environment has become the normality. And if you never experience that, the analog is a good way to experience that transformation. And you will find the same transformation when you go on orbit, when you go underground, and especially if you go underground, like in Cave X, in an environment that is going to be extremely complex. Cave X is a project where instead of going into a pre-canned, let's say, school of caving, of speleology, you go into a real expedition where the cave has not been prepped. It's a real exploration into a new environment that needs to be explored. I tried it last summer, and it was absolutely incredible. A cave in Sicily, where the average temperature is 100 degrees. 100% humidity and high level of CO2. You can only survive in there for a few hours, and you cannot stay much longer. You have to carry a lot of water, and we had to pre-stage all the electronic equipment so that it would work. And so the fact that you need to adapt not only yourself but everything you're carrying to a different environment to me highlights that value of the time, that you need to spend time into an environment in order to understand that there is an adaptation process. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of glad that I went through early enough. I didn't have to go do all these analogs. We use Space Shuttle as an analog and a discriminator to see if you were suitable for long-duration flight. So in the interest of time, Vadim, everybody knows Vadim Gushin, of course, from IBMP. And so in the interest of time, I'll just let you go ahead and please speak.
I will remind this ISMS 2017 because of the Apollo session. I heard so many lessons which I think are important not just for space medicine but for my life. And one answer is referring to the analog talk. How to select the crew. Crew is supposed to be selected in strict accordance with the mission target. What the mission objectives are, that's the requirements. Same for analogs. NEMO is good for sprinters. For those who, if you heard what Inessa was saying, for those who are ready to spend short period under interesting and picturesque conditions. Unfortunately, the flight to Mars is something absolutely different to the life of test pilot or for scuba diver. It will be extremely boring. It will be metal can. And mostly there will be no danger and risk to life. From that point, NEMO is not adequate to the simulation of Mars flight, but is perfect, for example, for the short mission to the moon or shuttle flight. IBMP has something that is perfect for the long duration missions. And of course, everything what we are doing in IBMP is absolutely targeted to the requirements of the real flights and future flights. What question we were answering during Mars 500? Could they survive under that monotony and boredom for 520 days? Another question was, what if the main crucial event would be in the middle of the mission? Because now the flights, the main events are at the beginning and the end. The launch and landing are the key elements. What is in between is something very the same, let's say. Because the days are not very much different. If there is something, if there is no something of nominal. What question we are going to answer in series? I gave booklets to the participants, and I can provide badges also, and that will be November 7th, the day of the Soviet Revolution, by the way, 7th of November. And the year is 100 from that date. That's so you can expect something. At least a revolution in science. Anyhow, without jokes, what questions we are going to answer? We spoke about lunar settlements. If we expect the lunar settlement with mixed crew, how much must be the size of that settlement so the members of the settlement could feel no stress and feel comfortably with the necessary amount of privacy and at the same time interact? That's the question we are going to answer. What is the perfect combination of the crew members? What are the relationship between the subgroups, male and female? And that's the design. For the first time in the history of IBMP and Russian science, we are going to have more than one woman in the crew. Believe it or not, we are doing that kind of research for more than 50 years, and there was not a case with 2 women in the crew. Secondly, we are going to see to continue answering the question about communication delay, its influence. Communication delay is not for the real life that Luca mentioned. You cannot do communication delay in NEMO because in this case the crew will be in danger. You cannot do communication delay on ISS. The crew will be in danger. But in the metal can, you can do it. And it turned out that it could drastically change the cooperation between the crew and mission control, which is now the key element of crew performance. All these questions will be asked, and to make the life of the crew even more difficult, our American colleagues, NASA is the contractor, the master of this experiment, let's say, and they asked us to make the sleep deprivation at the end of the mission. So it will not be that smooth, it will be stressful, not only monotonous. And of course, we are going to use modern technologies I'm learning from my American colleagues all the time. That's the advantage of cooperation, not just stress of interaction, but of course you can obtain some experience, and as I was mentioning yesterday. And that's actigraphy, which Russian side didn't use, but now we're going to, with some other measurements like proximity and physiological registration with one device. That will give us the stress level depending on the crew composition and distances between the crew members. The proximity is the factor which is dependent on my satisfaction with the contact. If I hate somebody, I want to have him at the distance. If I love somebody, I want to have him close. And we're going to use this actigraphy together with video registration. We're going to analyze crew communication with delay and many other things. And of course, this is only the first stage, 17 days, but the duration will increase throughout the project. Next year, we're going to have 4 months, then 8 months isolation, and probably 1 year. And that means that we will have enough statistics at the end to answer some questions that I already mentioned in my speech. And to sum up, again, there are no ideal analogs. That's why they're called analogs. Real life is not an analog. But analogs, it's mostly the only way to get the answers which real life is masking with numerous factors, like combination which is unique for each particular flight mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Vadim. I wonder if NASA had to pay extra to have the study start on the 100th anniversary of the Soviet Revolution.
Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, the actigraph, that probably came from your experiment on Mars 500, Dave. Is that true? Because you used those on your experiment, right? Yeah.
As a matter of fact.
Okay, great. Okay, our next panelist, of course, has been introduced several times. Akuto, veteran cosmonaut of 2 long-duration missions and also a physician, so an ideal member of this panel. Oleg?
Okay, the same introduction. Okay. Every day, okay. Good day for everyone, sir. I'm not very deep in problem of analog simulation, but what I want to say, so there is no one good analog. What I mean, there is no one universal analog. We don't say that we can build something like universal to answer for all questions we have. So again, if we're talking about caves, okay, that's good for specific reasons. If we're talking about Mars 500 experiment, okay, that is good for different purposes and different science. And what's very important to understand what you want to get as a result. For example, if you need to continue crew selection, astronaut or cosmonaut selection, okay, we have a pretty good set of analog experiments. For example, like survival training, which all Russian crews have to pass during their training, and to survive 3 days using only surviving kit from Soyuz vehicle. And that's as well as analog simulation, but analog simulation for what? Not only to demonstrate the skills how to build a shelter or how to operate the survival kit. It's possible to do during the regular classes. That means to show how the crew members could work together. If we're talking about try to find the good combination inside the crew, we can use different sets of analog experiments. If we're thinking about to do something in future, for example, to find the good criteria, psychological criteria, or criteria how to test some operational systems or supporting system or communication system. Okay, that could be a different. We can use existing analog for these purposes, but all PIs have to understand what we exactly what you want to reach during the experiment. Don't like this approach like, okay, let's take 6 guys, put them in a can for 6 months and let's take a look at that, what happens. And then we'll try to figure out what's in the result. Okay. I don't like this way. Okay. Because when the target or purpose of experiment, there is experiment by itself. So it's again saying there is no universal answer saying what's the best analog we can build on the ground. And answering the question, I think one is the best analog is ISS. Analog for long duration missions, for flights to Mars, flying to another planet. Again, this is analog for this mission. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Oleg. Our next speaker, of course, is again well known to everyone, Bill Shepard. Shep is, of course, was a former Navy SEAL as well as the commander of Expedition 1, in addition to 3 very successful shuttle missions. So, Shep?
My analog experience pre-flight was just about zero because we didn't have them in the space station program. But I did think that the survival training that we had in Russia was a very important part of creating an environment where the crew could be a team. And I didn't recognize it at the time, but it turned out that that was a big deal. And I'm glad to see that that's a part of analog training now in the ISS program because I think it's extremely important. I would like to share something that is done a lot in the military for this kind of training. People are put under stress when they have a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen, and this is a training thing. And quite often, even the time of the analog is not known to the people. They're just in the situation, and it's over when it's over. And sometimes people are even given false information to see how they react. I think these are important tools to get the crew to be as resilient as possible. I'm not sure how much of that is done. And I also think it's extremely important if you're going to have a good analog that's going to do this kind of stress, that the content and the flow of the analog be kept secret, if you will, from future participants, so their expectations about what they're going to have to go through are pretty blank. I think that's a big. Otherwise, you screw your analog up, and people know what to expect, then you're losing the efficacy of it. Last thing I wanted to suggest was I'd like to propose that NASA and the ISS create an analog that would basically focus on, you have a group of people and they have problems or they don't have what they need, but they have to create a device or a capability or a function or something out of what they have to work with. And I think the guy to run it is in the back row there, Don Pettit. I mean, he would be the perfect guy to set this up. But and one of the reasons why I think a lot about this idea is that we did some of that on the first expedition, and it was in part because some of the things that were supposed to have been in place in our flight didn't make the manifest, and we had to do without them. But it was an important aspect of the crew where we could do something by ourselves. It was creative, occupied our time, kept us busy. We were very proud of when we got it done. And I think the aspect of having this independence of the crew is a very positive thing, and we should create analog environments that stress that. So that's all I got.
Okay, thanks, Shep. And we have 2 additions to our panel. The first we heard from yesterday, Letitia is a NASA veteran as well as an appointment here at the Baker Institutes.
Yes. So I'll keep my comments brief since many of our colleagues gave excellent descriptions of the issues with regards to analogs. I will say with the human research program, we've extensively used analogs in order to address various risks with regards to space flight or evaluate various countermeasures. We have a number of different analogs going on. We have
Me.
so we also have, in addition to the HERA, as Dr. Barrett had talked about, we are also doing two studies in the NVHAB facility in Cologne, Germany, run by DLR, looking at various countermeasure development and studies of our VIP issue using the NVHAB facility in Cologne. In addition, as Dr. Gushin said, we are starting our Sirius 17 mission, a joint mission with IBMP, starting this Tuesday. It's a partially international crew. We have one German crew member, and we have 5 Russian cosmonaut candidates or scientists as a part of the crew. And what we hope to do eventually, as we get into longer durations with the 4, 8, and 12-month missions, is to have a fully international crew, and it's to evaluate team dynamics and behavioral performance over a long period of time, and to use the facility as a stressor and to mimic a Mars mission as closely as possible. So, Dr. Jin just left, but we are using other facilities such as High Seas and as Antarctica. There are not HRP analogs per se, but we do have studies that are operating in those as well. So we are trying to use those analogs to basically to buy down some of our risks as we go along and try to use as many opportunities as we can to do that effectively and as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Russian side is doing the same. We're also trying to use all opportunities to get statistics.
Yes.
Finally, we have our colleague from the European Space Agency.
I would like to subscribe to what the other members of the panel have said, which is that analogs have to be made with a purpose. So we should try to define what are the objectives in order to see what is the best analog to perform. And in opposite, we are when building or creating a new analog. Some people have already talked about caves. We try also to figure what is our expertise and where we can actually make the difference. And for the European Astronaut Center and more generally the campus, which is located at DLR in Cologne, there are already a facility for science, which is already used and recognized also by NASA. There is the operational capacity and expertise which is present in the European Astronaut Center, and we try to define also where we can combine both. We have chosen in our last creation something which is a bit fancy, which is the moon surface, but the moon surface is more there as a landscaping. It's not something where the in-phase should be put. What is important is to test and validate operational scenario either in surface operations or in the cooperation between astronauts and automated helper, or in the habitat, what kind of tools can really survive the proof of the tests in trying to operate in the everyday normal operations, or as Bill Shepard said, in crisis where you don't have everything that you would like to have, but you have to do with what you have there. And that's actually where we would like to put the focus. The operation and the focus of operation is also something I have is existing in what I was already hinting a few days ago about the Antarctica and the Concordia station, where we are in situations which are pretty much analog to exploration activities and exploration expeditions. So we try to get the lessons out of all that and try to combine that in something where we really we can provide an added value for the future exploration activities.
Thank you. So analogs, I think we all agree that analogs can be considered part of the training program. Of course, we've used simulators since the beginning of space flight as a training paradigm, and so analogs can be kind of viewed that way. But analogs, of course, are also used in research, and they also can be used as a discriminator for who might be suitable or what kind of person might be suitable for a long-duration flight or a flight to Mars or something like that. Some of the imperfections that have been discussed by the panel members include, of course, that the participants participants know that it's not real, and in the very worst case, if you're in a can, if there's a real problem, that the hatch can be opened, you can be taken out. We've talked about having the right people participate as part of these studies, particularly the research programs. If it's these young people that don't necessarily think operationally, then you might not be able to get the right results, or the research might be slanted in a certain way. One thing that I've always wondered about is, how much attention has been paid to having the crew that's going to be locked into the analog, having them train together and get to know each other as, say, an ISS crew might, or your crew that you're going to send to Mars. How much attention is paid to that? And I'll ask Dr. Gushin to start that discussion.
I can say that it again depends upon the objectives or purposes. For Mars 500, relying on the previous negative experience we get during Sphinx, where we had a serious conflict and even escape from the chamber, we trained the crew for more than 2 months. And we use that survival training and many other things, as some techniques of psychological group training. That will not be the case for that short duration mission. Of course, for 17 days, I think it's not such a big problem to work together. And do not forget, they are doing baseline all together for several weeks. That's good enough to get acquainted and to establish a sort of relationship which will be good enough. And of course, all that is done under the supervision of social psychologists from my laboratory. And the final choice of 6 subjects from 9 subjects is also based on the not only on the results of training who will be in the prime crew, 2 members of the astronaut corps and 3 candidates to the astronaut corps. They all demonstrated high results in training, but also they demonstrate good cooperation. And I think that's good enough to believe they will successfully pass the short duration mission. But for 8 months, for example, I think it will be doubled, the training period, and for 8 months even more. So again, it depends upon the purposes and the duration of the mission.
Okay, thank you. Shep?
Hey, Leroy, this stirs something that's been on my mind for quite some time. Our flight, we launched in 2000, and I had requested several years before we flew that the space station program come out with some policy about the recreational use of alcohol on board. And as far as I know, there is still no policy on that.
I think that's correct.
And I put out
no official
to
policy.
this group that this is a yeah, and if you're going to be in space for 3 years flying to Mars, we better address stuff like this, because I'm a big fan of people having recreation in space, and if they want to drink to moderation, how is that going to be done? Who's going to control it? What are the pros and cons of that? This is something that really needs to be studied, and nobody wants to touch it.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. And I think, of course, we've had the overlap in Russia, and anyone who's trained over in Russia and has spent a lot of time over there, I think understands and agrees with that. And anyone who's done a long duration flight, I think, would agree with you. But yep.
Can I bring 2 points of disagreement?
Sure, go ahead. Please.
So, and I'm not an expert on analog, so I apologize already, but there are 2 things with which I disagree with you. The first one is about flight to the ISS, the most exciting part being launch and re-entry. It shouldn't be.
No, I didn't say exciting. I said most stressful and important.
I disagree.
Key element.
I agree, but not most stressful or more important.
Key element. Okay.
They are.
Key
but
element.
What about TVAs? What about capturing spacecraft? What about performing very complex experiments? All astronauts look forward to those challenges, and they consider them as challenging, and they put a lot of importance into those expectations. And yes, of course, going up to the space station is a key element, is important, is stressful, is dangerous. Coming back from the space station is important, dangerous, and exciting. But all those activities that we do on the space stations are just as exciting. And it's like saying that coming and going is the most exciting thing of living. It's not, well, you know, being born and dying is not the most important part of our life. So I think that what we do while we are up there should be considered just as important or just as key. And I can guarantee you that all astronauts look forward to those activities. That's the first part of the disagreement. The second part, and this is more concerning to what your job really is, and what I was saying about living 520 days in a can. So take somebody like me. I'm a test pilot. Obviously, I have some characteristics that make me look for challenges, make me look for stress, make me look for new experiences. It's part of what I do as a job. And you tell me, well, Luca, you're going to fly for 260 days just to get to Mars doing nothing. Well, I wouldn't care. I'd be happy to do nothing for 260 days because the expectation is that I'm going to Mars. And who cares if I have to wait 260 days? I'm going to Mars. And on the way back, I don't care if I have to wait 260 days coming back because I'm coming back home. So expectation is something that you cannot reproduce in an analog. You just can't. You can tell me, hey, after 260 days, we will pretend that you get to Mars and we will pretend that you do an EVA on the Mars surface. Well, I'm going to pretend to be excited about that.
You're a great pretender.
But what I'm trying to say, is that something important in an analog, if you want to have real results, is to have real experiences. And that's why I was stressing the operational environment as very important in an analog, because if you put me underwater, I do have expectations of what I'm going to experience. If you put me underground in a cave, I do have expectations about what I'm going to achieve. If you put me in a can for 520 days, well, maybe you're going to give me expectations, but again, even the expectations are going to be simulated. So those are the two things that I disagree with.
May I answer?
Yeah, yes, of course.
I didn't really ask a question.
No.
But of course you can reply.
Of course we can discuss culture. Anyhow, I want to invite Luca to Moscow to see if his expectations meet the reality. You know, when I'm speaking about spaceflight, I don't know the reality. I know the interviews, I'm reading the talks, still I do not feel them. My expectations are different from the reality. Until I go into the cave, my expectations are based on the article or book of Michel Cifre. When I go to Antarctica, my expectations will be based on the book of Nansen. But that will not be the reality. Reality is a combination of real factors and how you perceive them. You demonstrated vividly that your perception is very specific and interesting, but that's not the perception of others. And that you must know that others can have different perception of the same events, meaning that the key element is middle of the mission. I refer to the experience of Christopher Columbus. His crew was very solid and cohesive on the way to the target of the mission. On the way back, the discipline became very low despite they were coming home. They relaxed, the tension was lost, target was achieved, and discipline and morale went down. And this is reality. The reality taken from the real people going to distant place for a long period of time. And that's the fact. My imagination can create different pictures how it can be. But as a scientist, I do not trust my imagination.
So I'm going to venture out and not disagree with either of you, although I'll remind you that Columbus lost 2 of his ships and many of his crew were dead on the way back. So the calculus was a little different.
That would put the morale down.
That would potentially put the morale down. But having worn the hat of a bureaucrat and an operations manager, both of these are different but parallel products. And when the decisions are made what criteria to use to select a crew to a long-duration flight, they will include Dr. Gushin's very rigorous research. And they will include Luca's experience base in a cumulative fashion. And we'll weigh both of those, and we'll build our crew in that fashion. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive whatsoever.
Just shot my chances of flying to Mars. Just
well, no, I mean...
Just tell me right away.
Well, with the Russians anyway.
Of Luca is that he's
No.
hilarious.
Luca's
So that's
perception is precious. Luca's perception is precious because it gives you another viewpoint from another angle.
Yep.
Any viewpoint is important. This is psychology. That's the
Exactly.
difference.
And so that part of my message is let's not discount Luca's experience or Dr. Gushin's science.
No, I don't think...
Because neither one of them are going to be an exclusive metric to build a crew.
Right. In fact, Luca brings up an excellent point. That's another imperfection of the analog is that, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, you're not in that real environment. But it also made me think about something interesting. So you talked about if I have to wait 260 days to get to Mars with nothing to do, I don't care because I'm excited about getting there. So I wonder if for an analog, for the participants in an analog to have that anticipation, what if they were promised some kind of reward going through, at the end of the simulation? Would that change the dynamic during the simulation?
Cash.
I mean
what
cash reward. Yeah, I mean, seriously. We get people to go to the desert in the Middle East to live out there most of their lives and drill for oil, and they do it because they make a lot of money.
Well, I think it's true, actually.
Yeah.
On the space station, during my expedition at least, we would look forward to special coffee on Saturdays and Sunday.
Right.
It was a made-up expectation.
Yeah.
And I usually had Kona coffee with cream, which is one of the standard drinks, and then on Saturdays I would give myself a cappuccino with hazelnut. And one day that I didn't find the cappuccino with hazelnut, my weekend was crushed.
Right. Right, and similarly to Shep's point, every now and then on Fridays we would look forward to a little certain something.
Just
too.
1 second. If all of our expectations will be correct, there will be no divorces.
That's an excellent point. I think we're running out of time, but please let's get a couple questions from the audience. Yeah, Olga?
Yeah, wonderful discussion. Everybody enjoyed it very much. But talking about a long flight to Mars and talking about different types of psychologists and different people there. I think the point that Luca was making, even if it will be very boring, but this crew, that selected crew, they will be very resourceful too. So you won't be bored. You will come up with something to do, I am pretty sure. And it will be group activity, it will be team building activities using VR, as Vadim was talking about VR before, using all sorts of different technologies. And even without technologies, I am pretty sure that will be something that the crew will discover. And that will be very important element of maybe also analog mission to see how the crew will or the team will be working together to develop some activities that are not actually planned. So another example, analog example, historical, it will be Fridtjof Nansen Arctic expedition on the ship Frem. And that was a very dangerous expedition. They didn't reach their goal. But he managed to plan the whole mission and activities of every crew member from the beginning of the expedition before they left. So it was very well planned. They stick to the schedule every day. And that probably saved the crew, saved morality. He didn't lose anybody, and he also survived. So it's another long story. But anyway, so what do you think about this type of analogs?
My colleague from US, Jack Stasser, is calling Nansen the founder of psychological support, and I agree with him. The ideas and strategy that Nansen used during the mission of Fram was reproduced in the Soviet space practice, like birthday celebrations, like gifts, surprises, and all these things. The problem is that even your favorite piece of cake, if you try it too frequently, becomes boring. The trick is that the longer the mission, the more efforts and more ideas you need, fresh ideas, fresh approaches. So it's not done. For 6 months, our astronauts, they are satisfied. Again, I'm reading all the talks every day, and the crew is saying that we want to send special thanks to the psychological support group, but that's not 520 days. Again, I do not want to imagine or expect. I want to know.
I just want to roll in on this a little bit because I think it scratches at the surface of something else that Oleg just brought up. I believe that the culture of people doing things for long duration expeditions in space is not the culture that you live in on the Earth, and may be somewhat foreign to people because it's different, and it needs to be different. Oleg was saying you're in the Army, you get up every morning, you stand tall, you make your bed. So there's a regimen to this that we may not like it, but I think it's an important part in some aspect of keeping everybody on an even keel. And we tried to set some of that tone when we flew. I don't know how much of it's left, but I think part of the task here is to establish what is that right culture, and how to get through the day, the week, the month, the year.
Yeah, we're trying to define that astronaut culture together with my colleagues from Canada and Norway. And this is very interesting. It exists. What I can say for now, it exists very special culture for the very special professional group for whom heroic deed is something very normal and usual. Still, it's not done yet. We're trying to define it, but it's not over, let's say. But very interesting, inspiring.
Yeah, it actually is very interesting, and I think all astronauts and cosmonauts would agree that, maybe in the beginning, before we started phase one, there was some suspicion, some wondering, but once we meet each other, we have that similar culture, that common culture of the profession, and I felt the same way when I met the professionals from the Chinese Space Agency. Even though we don't necessarily speak each other's languages perfectly when we meet, we do feel that bond.
Leroy, I'll give you one example. So I spent a lot of time in the Navy, and it was amazing to me when I came here that people would go up on the shuttle and they'd go to sleep for 7-8 hours with nobody paying attention to anything, and it's all being watched on the ground. I mean, to me, you would never find that in a Navy environment. But it's okay, it works. But I'm thinking when we're flying on Expedition 1, what if you wake up in the morning and there is no communication, something's busted, you're really on your own for a while.
Right.
And then where are you? So in the Navy, we have on ships, they have this thing, every morning at 8 o'clock, the captain gets a complete rundown of what's working on the ship, what's busted, who fell overboard, how much fuel you've got, how much storage you've got remaining, for the purpose that when he has to act independently, he knows what he's got to work with. And we started this on Expedition 1, and it lasted about maybe 3 or 4 expeditions, and then MOD threw it out. But I mean, this is the kind of thing that to me is destructive, if you will, of the onboard culture. And I'm sure people in MOD did it for good financial reasons, but it was an element of the necessary culture that got chipped away by the bureaucracy. We really have to not do this.
It came back.
It came back.
Yes, it came back, yes.
Wonderful.
Mike L.A. brought it back.
Yeah. And it's a small thing, but the day when you're on space station and everything goes fritz, which hopefully will never happen, but could, you at least know, how much oxygen do I have?
Right.
How many CO2 canisters do I have? All that.
I think we have time for one more. Go ahead, please.
So this is more of a comment than a question. Of course, there's a change coming. Commercial human spaceflight is on its way, and in the years ahead, there will be thousands and thousands of people going into space. And those individuals will need to be prepared, to be familiarized, to be to some degree trained to do so. So the commercial sector, industry, is preparing itself for that time. It'll take a few years. It will happen, and indeed Blue Abyss, my company, is establishing facilities, analog training facilities for that purpose. But we've got a period of time whilst industry establishes itself where government agencies can talk to industries and enable what will be established to be able to meet some of the needs that the current agency facilities might not be able to offer, to be able to meet. So it enables the government ability to extend its capabilities and save resources which can be diverted into exploration activities, if you follow me. So it's more of a statement, and I'm happy to talk more about that in the analog panel, which I think we've got following this.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and thank the panelists, and very lively discussion.